A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are interviewing the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Harav Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
When did the rabbis decide to establish the chief rabbinate in Israel?
Well, the answer to that question is really very simple. The rabbis never decided any such thing. In order to understand this topic properly and have a full command of the facts, we need to turn the clock back and know some of the historical facts. Israel, that is to say what was then called Palestine, came under the control of what was then the British Empire in 1917, when they conquered the land from the hands of the Ottoman Turks. Now, it should be noted that during the time of the Turkish rule, there was one could call it a chief rabbi that wasn't referred to by that term, but was known in Hebrew as a Chacham Bashi, the rabbi who was appointed over the Jewish subjects of the Ottoman Empire, or this part of the Ottoman Empire, and he was in charge of nominating rabbis and dayanim, rabbinical court judges, on the one hand. On the other hand, he was in charge also, and this was perhaps one of his more important functions, he was in charge of representing the Jewish community of the land of Israel vis-a-vis the Turkish authorities. He was responsible for tax collection amongst the Jewish subjects, because the authorities estimated how much each ethnic group should pay in terms of taxes to the authorities, and each ethnic group had its ethnic leader. In the case of the Jews, it was the Chacham Bashi, who was a Sfaradi rabbi, and he was in charge of that representation and that payment of taxes and dividing that tax burden amongst the Jewish populace evenly, etc. It's important also to recognize that this has always been the way of Jewish representation vis-a-vis a foreign occupying force. If we turn the clock back 2,000 years, for example, to Roman times, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the redactor of the Mishnah, who was without a doubt the greatest, or certainly one of the greatest of the Torah sages of his generation, he was also as Nasi, as head of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, he was also the political representative of the Jews vis-a-vis the Roman authorities. In other words, whenever you have a foreign occupying force ruling over the Jewish people in their land, and this also applies in other lands, as we shall see presently, those authorities often find it necessary or desirable from their point of view, for administrative reasons, economic reasons, etc., to appoint someone as the head of that community, of that ethnic group, and to deal with that person as a political representative of that group. So if we return back now to the Ottoman period, we had that situation which existed for many, many generations. Of course, this all came to an end when the British Empire, as it was then, entered the land of Israel, and the first governor under British rule, Sir Herbert Samuel, like any proper British gentleman, began to look into the administration of the country, and he realized that some thought was required, and Therefore, like any good proper British gentleman, he established a committee. In fact, he established two committees, and one of those committees was to deal with the organization of the different religious affiliations within the new mandate of Palestine. As a result of those deliberations, a system was set in place, and an electoral body was established, and in 1921 the chief rabbinate for the Jewish population of Israel, or Palestine as it was then, came into being. The first chief rabbis were, on the one hand, the Ashkenazi chief rabbi Harav Kook, and on the Sephardi side, Harav Yaakov Meir. It is very important to understand that the concept of a chief rabbinate of this type, which represents the members of a particular religious affiliation vis-a-vis the secular authorities, that kind of chief rabbinate is entirely a non-Jewish, non-Torah concept. The British, of course, found this idea suggested to themselves in their own minds by what they had in place in Great Britain. Some centuries ago, when the Jewish community began to once more grow in size after it was readmitted to England in the 17th century, in the 1700s, the British government created what was called the Chief Rabbinate for Great Britain and the British Empire. And this itself was modeled on the idea and the reality of something else which the British had invented a couple of centuries before that, namely the Church of England. When Henry VIII found it necessary to marry a different wife, and the Pope was not amenable to this suggestion, as well as chopping off a few heads, he also found it necessary to do something called the Reformation, by which he banned the Roman Catholic Church essentially from England. He established something in its place called the Church of England. Instead of the Pope, he established the Archbishop of Canterbury, and this was the new state religion, and all people were considered to belong to one or another religious affiliation, and it was only natural for the British to do the same vis-a-vis the Jews in the 1700s. And that is why, to this day, in England, in Britain, and in those countries which are part of the British Commonwealth to this day, countries like Australia, for example, New Zealand, etc., you have the concept of the Chief Rabbinate. You also have something else in England known as the United Synagogue. That is to say, many Orthodox synagogues in Britain belong to an association of synagogues known as the United Synagogue, which is headed by the Chief Rabbinate, and the Chief Rabbi has jurisdiction over and authority over those synagogues in terms of dictating certain halachic standards and procedures, and what will and will not be done in religious services, etc. It's important to note that all such ideas, all such notions, are actually foreign to Judaism, and the fact that they were transplanted here to Israel by the agency of the British Mandate doesn't make it any more Jewish or any more correct or any more necessary. If we look, for example, at the situation in Eastern Europe, shall we say, of the last few centuries, or in fact as far back as one cares to look, one will discover there was no such thing as a chief rabbi. Such an idea did not exist. Such ideas were only floated in the first place by secular non-Jewish governments, such as in Russia, where, again, for certain reasons such as controlling the Jews and enforcing certain policies vis-a-vis the Jews, they also wished to establish some kind of religious hierarchy for the Jews, and that is why the majority of the Jews paid no attention to that institution that was established by the Russian authorities. There was in fact no such thing as a chief rabbinate. There was no chief rabbi of a city, and there was no chief rabbi of a country. Every community or city, very often a city, had one rabbi, and he was responsible for and in charge of all Jewish affairs, halachic matters, etc., in that area of his jurisdiction, whether it was a community or an entire city, sometimes a certain region. But this was an internal Jewish matter for the most part, and it was allowed to function with little or no interference from the non-Jewish authorities. And so it should be in Israel today. The ideal that we should be striving for is, without discussing the long-term ideals, without going into that now of a Sanhedrin, a Beit Din Gadol, etc., in the more immediate term, we should be striving for a situation where communities are organized just as they are in most parts of Chutz La'aretz, overseas, outside Israel. Just as in, for example, in the United States, there is no chief rabbinate at all, and never has been. Again, not like in Britain, because there was no Church of England, just as there was no Church of England in America, so there was no chief rabbinate in America. These things go hand in hand. So in the United States, you have communities. Each community has its rabbi, and that rabbi has jurisdiction over that community. The people who want that person to be their rabbi, he is their halachic authority. He is in charge of community affairs pertaining to Torah procedures, etc. And that is how it should be. And that is also how it should be here in Israel. There is, however, one other point that needs to be made, and that is that as opposed to most countries in the world today, where you have, for example, civil marriage, two people wish to get married, all they need to do, if they don't want a religious service, is to go to the registrar and express their will to get married and sign some papers. There's a brief 2-minute service, and lo and behold, they're married. That does not work for the Jewish people, because according to Jewish law and tradition, all matters pertaining to marriage and divorce, etc., and Jewish lineage, and knowing who is Jewish and who is not Jewish, and ensuring that a woman who needs to be divorced receives a get, as is required by halakha. All such things have to be done according to halakha. If not, the Jewish people will run into insurmountable problems relating to questions of personal status, such as, is this individual Jewish or not? Is this person halachically a bastard, a mamzer? Was this couple, were both members of this couple Jewish when they got married? Who is to say so? How do we know? All such issues of this nature must be decided according to halakha. If not, the Jewish people will be split asunder into groups which will not be able to marry amongst themselves, and Jewish unity and Jewish national existence will run into a very serious state of affairs. In order to prevent this, this was understood by David Ben-Gurion and other secular leaders at the beginning of the State of Israel. In order to prevent this, it was agreed that according to Israeli law, all such matters will be dealt with by the body known as the Chief Rabbinate. So for that purpose, we require a central body that will be in charge of marriage, divorce, and other personal issues of that nature, so that they will be run according to some uniform halachic standard which all Jews will be able to live with. There is one other area, also important but less crucial, and that is to have a national system of kashrut supervision, so that when a person wishes to buy a pizza in Eilat, they can know that in this store the pizza is kosher. There needs to be somebody which will be in charge of these things, otherwise it will be difficult to know what is kosher and what is not, just as it will be difficult to know who is married and who is not married, and who is Jewish and who is not Jewish. Beyond these very specific fields, there is no need, and in fact I would claim the opposite. More harm than good is done by the existence of the Chief Rabbinate in Israel, beyond dealing with these two issues. And even with regards to these two issues, there are many changes that might and should be considered. At any rate, to sum up, it's important to know that this very conception, this notion of a chief rabbinate, which, as we make this video today, is a very hot topic here in Israel because of the upcoming elections to this body of the chief rabbis. This entire body is really the wrong answer to the wrong question. It was put in place by foreign powers who came here with their own ideas and for their own purposes established this body, and it never really took hold as the original Chief Rabbi Cook envisaged. Therefore, we have to look at the matter realistically and know that we are not dealing with a meaningful Torah body, but rather with a necessity regarding those specific areas of Jewish law which I mentioned. And beyond that, Jewish life should at this point center upon community building, and each community should and must choose the rabbi that suits its purposes and its lifestyle and its outlook. And that in essence is what we have, or at least to a large extent what we have. This has to be made more formal and more plain, so that all Jewish communities can function according to their will, and not have rabbis or institutions imposed upon them. If these ideas were understood and the historical basis for the Israeli chief rabbinate were better understood by many people, I think many of the arguments which we have seen in recent weeks and months here in Israel would have been seen to be, as in fact they are, superfluous.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. And a word to our viewers. If you would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with Rabbi Bar-Hayim in honor or memory of a loved one, or if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.